Thank you, Bertrand and everybody for having me. My name is Patrick Spero. As Bertrand mentioned, I'm the librarian at the American Philosophical Society. And, Bertrand thanked me for coming, but I really should be thanking him for inviting me because this has been great. Although I'm not going to thank him for the task that he's given me, which is to talk about some of the things that are happening in the United States in anticipation of the 250th anniversary, but also in particular things that are happening at the American Philosophical Society. And he's also asked me to comment on all the papers and try to have some wrap-up concluding thoughts on all of them. And also to do it at 4:30 or 16:30 in the afternoon, being the person that's holding, you between the wine bottle and dinner. So I guess first I was going to start with some of the things that are happening in the United States. The American Philosophical Society, where I'm based, we were founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1743. We're the United States' oldest learned society. We were modeled off the Royal Society. We have an incredible collection of Revolutionary era manuscripts and materials. We also have recently just partnered with something called the David Library of the American Revolution, and that's something I really want to share with everybody today, what that partnership means for scholars, means for people researching the Revolution. The David Library was an independent research library outside of Philadelphia. It had amassed an enormous collection of manuscripts from the Revolution, over 20 linear feet of just incredible letters, account books. And then in time, it also started to acquire microfilm. And so it now holds over 9,000 reels of microfilm from over 68 archives around the globe. It's probably about 7 to 9 million pages of manuscripts there. All that material has now come to the Philosophical Society, and we're using the David Library's resources to create the David Center for the American Revolution. And the David Center really aims to bring scholars together, much like you all are trying to do with these symposiums. We want to build bridges around the globe to connect scholars working on the American Revolution. And so the David Center has a few initiatives that I want to let everybody know about. First off, we're going to be launching a major fellowship program to bring folks to use these materials. We've obviously been impeded by the coronavirus pandemic. This partnership was formalized actually in March of 2020 when all the materials came to us. It was in early March. By the middle of March, all the plans were redirected, shall we say. The other thing that we have, we just launched last spring, and it's been going great, is a seminar series. It's turning into, we wanted to do it maybe once or twice in a semester, a work in progress, somebody's work in progress. We're now trying to do, maybe up to 4 a semester. So I really encourage people to tune into those seminars. It's a pre-circulated paper, usually a chapter draft, and also to consider submitting your material as well. I should say I'm an American, so am I talking too fast for everybody, or is it okay? Okay. I'm not a New Yorker. They talk really, really fast. So kind of check out those opportunities. There's going to be even more rolling out. We also do a brown bag, which are for works in progress. Not, there's no pre-circulated paper, but it's every Tuesday. And 1 month of Tuesday is dedicated to the Revolution. And you can tune into those, but also if you have something you want to present, you should reach out to us as well. These are a little more informal, smaller groups of people zooming in. The other thing that we're doing is something called Revolutionary City. And if I was able to, I was going to show you the beta test of this website. It's called therevolutionarycity.org. And so the APS with the Historical Society of Pennsylvania and the Library Company of Philadelphia is creating a digital repository of over 150,000 manuscripts that relate to the Revolution in Philadelphia in particular. If you go to the website, therevolutionarycity.org, you can see it's very early stage beta version. There's not much in there, but by 2026, we'll have 150,000 pages of manuscripts digitized and available on that website with a whole bunch of other resources. The last thing I wanted to talk about is a conference that we're doing on October 21st and 22nd. And it's called The Meanings of Independence. It actually begins as a virtual conference on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. The program is now online. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we'll have 3 scholars presenting pre-circulated papers. It'll be about an hour-long conversation. The panels are arranged around different topics or themes that we think are going to be of prominence, both for scholars in the coming years, but also as institutions like the APS or museums are trying to confront or think about how to commemorate 1776 and 2026 for the public. The APS has a museum that gets about 200,000 visitors. Up the street from us is the new Museum of the American Revolution, which is the first museum dedicated just to the American Revolution. So there are a lot of cultural institutions in the United States trying to think about how to commemorate 1776. And this conference, we hope, will do that. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is a pre-circulated paper virtual conference. And then Thursday, Friday is a hybrid conference where we'll be having panels in person and an audience in person, but also people able to Zoom in like this. So check that out. And it's that topic of the conference, Meanings of Independence, that I think really help organize my thoughts on the papers that we've heard, which I've been scribbling on these, and now I will try and make sense. And as you can see, my scribble is not very good, so I may not even be able to interpret my own. So I want to just kind of maybe go through each one of the papers quickly, just some thoughts on them, and then maybe have something, a way to maybe bring them all together in some ways that, at least in my head, as I heard them, they were. So Emily, I really enjoyed your take on the historiographical debates. It's something I've thought about. Is, one of my books I end on, was the revolution really a revolution? Getting at the people asking it, and it's really different. If you ask, where are you looking, when you're looking, and who are you looking at, is one of the really, and when you do that, the answer is going to be different each time. But I also was thinking about, and I don't know if you want to comment on this either now or later, the other big debate that I've really got me interested in this era originally was the Great Origins debate. What caused the American Revolution? Not the interpretation of the event itself, but what was its origins? And there was this strident, heated, and to me engaging debate beginning in the 60s and lasting really to the 90s. Between the Whig and neo-Whig school, the progressives and neo-progressives, and then of course Jack Green's Atlantic views on the constitutional imperial views on the origins of the revolution. And that debate in some ways has really died down. And I even think when we think about 2026, it's not on the forefront of many people's minds. Why did this event happen? It's not a question anymore. And I don't know why it is. It's more about, what does this event mean? So I don't know if you've given any thought to that. Francesca's paper on Matt Tsai, I've been fascinated with him ever since. As I mentioned, I stayed at Monticello, and at the APS, we actually had a special event where there's a vineyard where Mattei lived now, and it's an Italian winemaker that does the wines, and it's called Jefferson Vineyards, if I remember correctly, or something like that. But we had him up to the APS for one of our Jefferson exhibitions, and it was good wine for Virginia at least. Okay. The thing that I was thinking about in your papers is your use of the term propaganda, and what propaganda means, and if that is what Mattei was doing. Because when I think about this moment, this is something where Habermas talks about the creation of the public sphere, where the public sphere is an area for debate, discussion, persuasion, where I think about propaganda more as manipulation, coercion. And so I just wonder where you think Mattei falls within that line, propaganda. Steve's papers on the Declaration, paper on the Declarations. I mean, unpacking the history embedded in it, I think is going to be a major contribution, as you note in your paper. And I can't wait to see it develop. Something you mentioned, the Matlack version and how there are differences. And I just wanted, if you could talk more about how the versions of the Declaration might also, what it tells you about how they were interpreting the past at their time. And you got at some of those debates in your talk, but I think looking at those versions would be absolutely fascinating. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. And Gerard, so I was going to mention, if you haven't been to the APS, you have to come because we have this incredible collection. I'm sorry I missed you on your fellowship because it sounds like you found them. But that French Constitution, I would love to read the whole thing, and I didn't know if you could talk more about where that proposal is, because I personally would like to see it. But also, have other people talked about it and studied it? And secondly, when I think about Americans in the French Revolution in this period, they're either supportive of it, like say Paine, or they're critical of it, like a Hamilton. What makes this kind of unique to me, and it may just be me, is this is the first person that's trying to do something proactive about the revolution. It's one thing if they're critiquing it or they're supporting it, where Morris is actually trying to, resolve or solve something.
To be enacted.
Yeah, and whether or not, there are other people that are out there proposing possible paths for France from America, or if it's just because Morris is, embedded in the culture in the moment now that it's coming from there. So those are some general thoughts on the papers. And when I thought about what really might unite them in some ways, what was that topic of our conference, which is meanings of independence. And we formed a program committee to organize that conference, and we said, how do we want to talk about independence? And what we were struggling with is we don't know how to talk about it right now in this moment. One of my advisors, talked about one of the things that he feels has happened in the last 2 generations is that the ability to talk about a universal event like the revolution is becoming harder and harder to do. I'm paraphrasing him, but he said that their generation knocked Humpty Dumpty off the ledge, and no one's been able to put him back together again. So how, what is the revolution? What is its meanings? And the things that really came out in these papers is just how uncertain and contingent it is, how it's really hard to pin down what the revolution meant even to many of the actors at the time. And so I don't know what that tells us for Morris, who's trying to end a revolution, or when we're trying to periodize revolutions, when even in their own moment, they're not quite sure how to think about, talk about, or what this revolution itself even means. And I think some of this comes up in these papers. When I'm thinking about Emily's project, I'm also thinking about all the first histories that were written of the revolution, and how there was a debate, a historiographical debate that she's talking about. Much of it is in the 20th century, but you can find echoes of it really in the first histories that were published on the revolution in the 18th century. So even from that early period, people are trying to figure out what this revolution meant, and there's no clear answer. I mean, you've got Paine, you've got Burke, you've got all these other people that are trying to interpret this in its real time. With Matt Zai, his pamphlet that you've studied, is trying to get at the meaning of the revolution itself. And as you say, he sees 1787 as a counter-revolution, as a break from 1776. So this is very much at the forefront. And the other part that, in your paper that came out is how the debate between the states and the nation are prominent. Here is Matt Zai traveling on a state appointment, and Franklin saying, no, states can't have their own diplomacy. So there's a tension going on, and what is legitimate authority in this period. And then, of course, the French Americanists, who are themselves having a debate about French institutions and looking at, the British models, American models. So there's an incredible amount of debate and uncertainty in this period. And then, of course, there's Morris. And Morris, putting him in his context, he is a federalist who is highly supportive of constitutions, as came through in the proposal to the French one. But in some ways, he's in the minority, even in the United States. As some people have argued, if there had been a poll taken of Americans in 1787, 88, the Constitution itself probably would have failed. So I think what I'm trying to get at is just how uncertain and contingent the American Revolution was, even in its own time, and how hard to define it was for people then, which is what I think really creates what makes it so interesting for us today to try and sort out. And to get to just conclude, I guess, the way I've often taught it goes back to what Steve had said, is that a revolution, if you think about it as that cycle, when it turns back, that is in some ways, that's what Steve's paper gets at, is that they were looking for historical antecedents for everything they did. But even as they tried to move back, any revolution, you're moving a body. And as I would teach my students, it started to move. And so that the revolution itself may have been started by trying to return back, but by going around in this revolution, it continues to move forward. And in many ways, things like the party system, debates like, I was struck by how Woodrow Wilson talked about how ordered, things were. But, for an American, I don't think the United States has ever been well ordered or structured. If you think about the 19th century, it is incredibly, the frontier life. It is in some places a lawless society. So the idea that there had ever been order. So it's almost like the revolution itself has been on a continuing, and it's continuing to evolve and move forward. So those are just some of the thoughts that came to mind reading all your papers and hearing them today. Thank you again for a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're used to it, no. But please, have the speakers answer if they wish.
Yes, in terms of the question that you raised about the idea of propaganda, you're right, and maybe a better word would be advocacy, because he felt a deep commitment to advocating the American cause, the American Revolution, which was extended to Europe, but not only. He in the days prior to the actual outbreak of the American Revolution, he had written pieces that he published in the local gazettes in Virginia to actually stir up support for that. And so, yes, maybe propaganda is a bit strong, but this idea of a constant advocacy and yeah, you're right. Public sphere debates, discussions, etc. I'd say was very much part of those discussions, and he also participated in setting up the Virginia Constitutional Society. He as well believed in constitutions, maybe of a different nature from Morse, and he was also an unconditional defender of the idea of freedom of speech. But still, like I think everybody in this world, well, he had a prism of interpretation that was his own, and that he shared with a certain number of people in his circle. And so there's always a way where you use your ideas to advocate your cause, and it becomes political. And therefore, his vision of the American Revolution, I think, ended up being distorted by that as well. But is any vision of anything ever really objective? So that's, I think, his approach. But I think you're very right in raising that question.
Sorry, but I'm happen to be reading a book at the moment on propaganda, the different meanings of propaganda back then and today. I really highly recommend it. I don't have the author's first name, his last name is Castronovo. And it's a great book because it says that what we think today as propaganda, especially because since World War II, did not mean that at all at the time. It was not just negative to impose a view, but it could be. So I think it would. What you are saying corresponds to what's in this book. So
official title.
This is a propagate.
much more neutral than today.
Today it would be today it would be Minister of Information.
Right.
But I mean, because this is a very serious issue for us, Are we going to keep that title in your? Because as far as I remember, or did we just? Is there something like propagandist of the?
Not in the title.
Not in the title.
Yes, there is, but maybe the
we abandoned the title.
Not in the title. No. Citizen of the world in revolutionary time.
Okay.
No. No propaganda. But yes, I talked about it.
Yeah.
But maybe yes, it's like a definition would come in handy with reference to the idea that the meaning of the term propaganda has been changed and can be intended in different ways, and what we intend here is more to propagate, to diffuse, to.
It would be good for your argument.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Is it okay if I answer your excellent points about the different versions? Yes, I have them on screen and in piles, written versions, and I am tracing every phrase, every word, every piece of orthography, and what that might mean in historical terms, in terms of historical argument, content, consciousness, and all the other things I've talked about. And I think there's a lot in them. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the one I did mention, as you said, was the Jefferson's original version, how that circumstances of immigration settlement here was cut down to please the Dickinsonians. But I also trace that back, not only through the evolution of the text from Jefferson's original to the one submitted on June 28th, which was slightly moderated in terms of Jefferson's views of the Constitution and its history, then the three versions, as it were, produced by Congress itself, the July 4th, then the corrected one, and then the Matlock one. Also, but also, yeah, and I trace the orthography as well, especially the M dashes. So there's just so much in the different versions and their evolution that tells us such a lot. You're absolutely right. But I'm also tracking it back through, Jefferson and Dickinson had this argument out about the origins of America and the colonies in the Declaration on the Cause of Taking Up Arms. So I'm tracing it back through that. Dickinson had it out with Richard Brand in the 1766-67 over this same issue with Virginia Richard Brand, who first argued Jefferson's free emigration theory. And I'm tracing it back through colonial literature as well. So it all does trace back. Yes.
That reminds me, the other thing I was going to ask you is the state declarations of independence that are issued. Have you looked at those to see if there's a historic?
Yes. And there's a lot. Again, yes. I mean, I've got, and a lot of them do the same as the Declaration of Independence. They contain that same historical consciousness, and so my first chapter is just full of those. Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Quite right.
All right.
Okay, I want to say goodbye before you turn it off. Well, I'm back. Hello, thank you so much for staying this long until the end, the very end, and it was a pleasure to have you. I hope you enjoyed it. And well, what can I say? We'll be together for the next 5 years. So I just love it. And so next year in Munich, June 22, and in the Sorbonne, June 22, also the conference, but we'll email you, specific information until then, and please keep in touch. Okay, bye. Thank you to all. And the last word is for Emily, and an applause for Emily because she did so much work. That's why I'm so relaxed, because Emily did everything.
Well, again, thank you everyone for logging in, for staying with us until the end. And thank you for those who came, those who left already, and those who are still here. All right, see you in a few months. Goodbye.